Hi. Good afternoon, honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The conference will be started very soon. Please be seated. My name is Freeman and I will be MC today on behalf of the organizer, Pitch Perfect. And I would like to extend my warm welcome to all the guests to attend the event today, Angel Investor Roundtable. Angel Investor Roundtable is one of the Asia top gatherings of investors that focus on serious investment developments, helping new individuals or existing investors understand and how they can be successful in the ever-changing investment market. The ceremony will be held very shortly. We will appreciate this if you could kindly switch to a mobile phone in the silence mode. Thank you so much. On this occasion, it is now my pleasure to invite the guests of honor to come on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please join our hands together to welcome our MD of Hodge Ventures, Mr. Desmond Marshall, to deliver his welcome speech. Welcome, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We still have people coming along, but we don't want you to wait for too long. Thank you again for coming. I'm glad we don't have too much rain today because it was really rainy for the past 2 days. Angel Investors Roundtable, for some of you, it's not the first time coming around here, but the main purpose of the Angel Investors Roundtable is for people who are existing investors, and also some of you around here are thinking about becoming an investor. And our purpose is mainly to tell you and share with you our experiences, our guests' experiences, and also the case studies, so that you can be better into new investments, especially these days today, because a lot of people are still thinking about property, traditional markets, but then again, there's Uber, there's Airbnb, all these kind of new companies coming along, sprouting along, and they are really, really huge. So, but it's for a lot of people that these things are still very foreign to them, and it's very difficult for them to understand. Now, before I go along and introduce our guests, I would like to invite and also thank our partners, the venue partners around here, Regis, for providing us with this office venue around here. I would like to invite Ms. Jenny Hui to come along and also to talk a little bit about Regis and their support for us. Please give her a big hand.
Thank you, Desmond. I'm Jenny, and so I'm not sure how familiar you are with Regis. So actually, Regis is the largest service provider in the world. We have 3,000 locations in 120 countries. So in Hong Kong, we have 17 offices at the moment, and we will have the 18th office set up in January 2017, which will be in Causeway Bay, Windsor House. So for the services, actually the main service we provide is service office. So it can be from 1 month to 24 months. So other than traditional office, we also provide virtual office service. So we can handle telephone calls and mail handling for our clients. We also have membership program, so you can use the business lounge in every center, or you can also use a private office in any center in the world. So for the location, at the moment in Hong Kong, we have 5 offices in Central, 3 in Wan Chai, we'll have 3 in Causeway Bay and 1 in Quarry Bay, and we have 2 floors in ICC, which is the tallest building in Hong Kong. And then we have 2 centers in Tsim Sha Tsui, 1 in Mong Kok East and Kwun Tong as well. So after the event, we will have a networking time. So at that time, we will have colleagues show you around the center if you're interested. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you, Desmond.
Thank you, Jenny. And for those interested, Regis will be providing a tour later on to go around and take a look at. how the office is. It's pretty good around here. So you just look at the view outside. Without further ado, I would like to invite our guest of speaker today, Mr. Eric Wong from TCG Capital. Please give him a big hand. This is how we do normally. The investors roundtable is more like I said, a round table. So what we do is actually we're looking into the topic for today. We're talking about family offices today, how traditional investors and also the new age investors collide in this new world here. And Eric is the chairman and CEO of TCG Capital, which I will later have you to introduce a little bit about yourself. But the format is pretty much open. So we will be discussing a few questions, leading questions with Eric, and me, myself, we will be exchanging some of the cases and experiences out. For those of you outside on the floor here, you don't just have to listen, you can put in some of your comments, you can share some of your experiences. It's pretty much like a roundtable meeting. So, of course, the focus and the topics should be related to our theme for today, which is related to family offices. So, let's start off. Eric, thank you very much for coming again to here to the roundtable. Why don't you give us a little bit about background about TCG Capital?
Sure. So, okay. So originally, my grandfather started a chemicals business in Shanghai in 1918. He moved it down to Hong Kong along with all the textile barons, the dyes and so on, that industry. Moved it to Hong Kong, reestablished the chemicals business. My father joined. We got into electronics, semiconductors, equipment, selling it into China. Not very much in the way of, for that period of time, it was considered technology, but for all intents and purposes, it was old school manufacturing and distribution, engineering type stuff. Towards I think this was in the 80s, we started putting money to work with various Silicon Valley VCs. A few hits, lots of misses. I remember one of the fortunate investments we had was we were very early into Cisco, which had its glory day, now less so. Out here in Asia, also we had an investment into Asia Info. And then more recently, we were one of the earlier investors into Pharmaset, which got bought by Gilead, a biotech company, for their treatment of it's like hepatitis B, I think. So that has characterized sort of our more removed VC investing. So after we sold off most of the manufacturing assets in the 90s, we started the family office, TCG Capital, in 2003. And what we were looking for then was to deploy the family's assets, and we were looking for stuff that was liquid. So typically that meant not so much the VC investments, but in a roundabout way, we ended up going back into that space. So initially, we were really just trading, providing capital to traders in financial markets. That led us to get into high-frequency trading, market making, the type of trading activity that banks used to do, and is very technology-driven, but the output is generally not a listing. Until recently, some companies have done that. In that space, it's all about pulling out X amount of profits from the markets. They're usually very profitable ventures, but they're somewhat like law firms where there's 5 or 6 key, mostly IT personnel, and they pull down considerable profits, but they never go public. They just keep it very quiet. And so we backed a couple of those, somewhat like a VC. It was a blended VC approach where we provided them both working capital and trading capital, and carved out a piece of the company as well as a piece of the profits that were generated from that kind of trading. From that experience, we set up a platform called Celera, CELERA, which has in Hong Kong a Type 1, Type 2, Type 9 SFC license. So we're both a broker, asset manager, but we also have an arm that does fintech. So we invested, typically what we're doing is really taking technologies we developed in-house and spinning it out into new companies, which so far we have not really looked for outside investors into those technology investments, but the intention is to, because that's the best way to retain the technology talent, the IT talent, that if they were housed within a financial firm, they would be compensated quite well, but I don't think that would satisfy the entrepreneurial drive that some of them have. And so we decided that we should try to spin out all the technology and have sister companies actually pay the main IT side, Solera Networks, for the use of the technology that's developed in-house. So generally, we have looked at some of the fintech investments in this space, but most of what we have done was probably spun out from in-house developments. So that's TCG Solera at a high level.
Okay. I'll give a little bit of introduction about myself as well, Hoosh Ventures. Basically what we do is actually we do from investment seedings, from angel investors to pretty much like a little bit early pre-A series. We look into different investments, but also we look into how we do strategic packaging of companies to become more investor ready. But looking at this around here, and one of the things that we do and we also see is that family offices are changing at this point around here. And that's the reason why I had this topic to talk about. Now going back to Eric, it's interesting because your family or the original family you looked into are electronics and also chemicals.
Yeah.
How did you guys switch from that area, which is pretty hardcore, to another area? Because I'm sure that internally there's going to be like discussions and also people debating about whether you should go here or go there. And what was the process in your family office?
Well, I'll tell you how we got into the venture capital stuff in those early days. I would say almost half of those investments were done because my father sat next to someone at like an Asia Society dinner or something like that, and he turned out to be a VC, and then he comes back and says, oh, that they're doing something very interesting, maybe we should put some money with them.
Okay.
And that's how I would say half of those investments happened.
Wow.
So not disciplined, not just
Okay.
somewhat lucky on some of them, but yeah.
Very convenient for the VC as well.
Yeah, it was just though, we had a dinner, and all of a sudden, there's like a few days later.
Right time, right
so,
place, right dinner.
And I think you'll find that if it's the family office crowd, it is kind of that haphazard and relationship driven.
Right.
Until they perhaps choose to more narrowly define what areas they want to do and actually put process and people into whatever area they choose to do. Otherwise, it's kind of whoever has access to the founder.
Right.
Probably
Easy enough to talk to that person and how you motivate that person. But did you ask your father or go into talking about what kind of things were he interested in? Because it's a little bit different than the kind of family offices that I see, because we tackle to some of the family offices as well, and sometimes it's pretty difficult when the first generation is pretty conservative, whereas the second generation, which is pretty much you, is looking forward for something new. And it's a good thing on your case around here is that your father was at the very forefront in terms of changing or doing something new. But did you talk to him in terms of, okay, how was he thinking? Because changing to a new area is scary many of the times. But your father was willing to move into that area, which I think that there will be also some people inside the family talking about, okay, should we be switching over to this area or some of the, let's remain to the traditional areas.
Sure. Well, I think the traditional areas we were in were already in decline quite a few years ago. So in some ways it wasn't a choice. It was sort of, our hopes had been that the investments into the VC direct or through funds or so on would potentially open up new business lines for our old business, but really it hasn't, because it didn't have that kind of focus that if we said, okay, we're only going to look at hardware-driven VCs who are looking at China for cheaper manufacturing or for engineering service. Okay, that might have been a theme that might have taken us somewhere. But I mean, the way we were investing, it was all over the place. And so without that focus, then it's just spray and pray for all intents and purposes. And so that's why now I think we try to focus mainly around fintech, though we've also gone into telecom technologies as well. But I think a guiding theme for what we want to do is applying the power of marketplaces to traditional incumbent areas like banking, like telecom, like so on, that have really, they have embraced technology, but they really haven't.
Right.
They get away because of size and scale and regulation, but not because they have the cutting edge technology or a new way of doing some of these things.
Right.
And so I think harnessing the power of markets with technology to change stodgy old businesses.
I could share you one of the cases that I had talking to some of the family offices is that they're a big family in Hong Kong. They start up with they have very traditional kind of financial companies in Hong Kong, and they're being controlled by the fathers and also first generation. And the second generation came in for family office, and then looking into like things related to fintech in that area, which is pretty much what most family offices will be thinking about, as opposed to what your father originally thought about. It's been everywhere, but you're finding the right path of moving forward. So how difficult was that moving from, okay, when your father is looking at everything, and for you to go in and say, okay, Dad, we need to like focus on different things. Were there some challenges in between? How do you
I think that again, haphazardly, the main thing that drove my freedom to go into almost any area and the financial focus was really a need that the family had to manage its assets. And then to nurture that type of team that could do that job meant giving them a future that was also entrepreneurial.
Right.
Because if you're stuck in a family office, typically, well, you're not going to be the founder and you're not going to be the CEO, most likely, rarely. So you have to give them some direction that allows them to really turn something into a business. But like the main point I was going to make was that I'm in my mid-30s. My father's going to be 90 next year. So because of the age gap, by the time I was ready to do stuff, he was also kind of just hanging out. But had he been potentially a much younger patriarch, he would have wanted, I want to dictate this. I don't want that. So it's also that's how haphazard families are.
Right.
And it's true of all families, big, small. The age gap was big, the age gap was small. Founder likes this, next generation likes that. That there is no set formula, but it is sometimes just that random.
It's interesting because a lot of things, or when I talk to new companies, new startups, or talking to investors, the last thing I talk about is actually the product or the company themselves. It's more like understanding the mentality behind those people, or what's driving them behind a certain investment or a certain liking to a certain thing. And also in terms of, especially with family offices, we had to like cater to the new generation who's sort of like in control on daily operations, but also to actually understand who's actually calling the shots behind. Is it really the dad or the mom or something else? Because your case is very different from like traditional other families. Because most family offices will be looking into like traditional investments like property, stocks, bonds, all these normal kind of things. And when you talk about new stuff from a VC or a PE or a startup, it's like really scary because there's no guarantee. They may drink a lot, they may know a lot, but on the paper it's like we have no revenue. and so the good thing about your case here is that you've got an open-minded father who's actually looking into, okay, we have to protect the family assets on a long-term basis, and passing the torch over to your side around here. One of the questions I like to know is, from your case around here, what do you think about the challenges that you have as a second generation who's at this point looking into all your family assets and looking into the investment markets outside? So you've got the traditional kind of investments, you got the Uber, Didi, or whatever kind of new age kind of companies around here. How do you look into, okay, what are the challenges as a family office as opposed to other traditional like individual investors or firm investors or pretty much any other things?
Well, I think the mentality when the family and the related families and so on who always did business together, when they look back in history, they say, okay, chemicals drove our first series of wealth. Electronics, another one. So I think they've been also part of the reason for trying to look at these different VCs and so on was to look for, what's the third thing? And if there was a third thing, they would probably pile into it with the same focus that they did on the first two. Because generally, I think there's often a saying that where are the investors' yachts? Because you see a lot of VC managers who have yachts. Do their investors make that kind of returns as well? Well, maybe not. So the idea is we want to have a guiding hand in whatever it is that business that we're going to possibly propel a third wave of wealth. And so what we've loosely centered around is the theme of the bank disintermediation theme. And this is not really from a purely VC or tech investment. We'll look at a broad range from seed, probably not very far along type of businesses that involve that play of regulation has changed the world of banking and finance. It doesn't mean it's any easier for someone else. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden startups can thrive. They usually cannot, because the regulation, if it's prohibitive on banks, it's just as prohibitive on any other types of startups and so on. But the fact is, a space that was captive to banks is now opened up. And so there does need to be some room for creativity, but still keeping in mind the compliance and regulatory burden. So, I mean, that's something we've seen specific to fintech, where we see very creative people doing, say, a robo-advisor theme, and they're all from the travel industry. And so they came up with a very user-friendly way to sign up an account and so on. But the premise of their business was that you were wiring your money into their business's account. That's a big, big no-no certainly from Hong Kong, almost any other regulatory body anywhere else in the world. But they approach it with, yes, this entrepreneurial enthusiasm, but totally non-compliant with regulations. And so that's where there is the need for some kind of platform that can address and say no to these ideas, or force people to amend their ideas without stifling the creativity, but still being compliant with the regulations. And we haven't really seen that in fintech. So you see a lot of people doing even remittances. Like they have new ways to try to open a bank account in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Just try to do that and tell people that you're in the remittances business right away. Yeah. It's like the banker will just kick you out of the office. No AML compliance policy, wires in and out, how is that being tracked? Right. All this kind of client onboarding, how does that work? So, yeah, the entrepreneurial side blindly disregards the rules of the local regime.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you talk about how that fintech is. I could give you a case. Recently, we were talking to one of the companies who's doing P2P financing in Sweden. Now, it's pretty much like normal P2P kind of funding, where you know what's outside the market outside. People can put in and say, hey, I can lend you money, etc., etc. But one of the key things that was different from the normal P2P, which you said was totally crazy, that I take in all the money and then I'll just run off with it, and non-compliance or whatever, compliance will, or Hong Kong MA will be killing you anyway, is that the Swedish government is actually supporting it by asking the biggest bank in Sweden to work together with this company. And suddenly it became the due diligence part, all the responsibility goes into that Swedish bank.
Right.
That's the biggest state bank in Sweden. Yeah, compared to HSBC, of course, they're small, but it's a country.
Sure.
And because of the Swedish government, it's not a big government, it's very supportive of it, and they're ensuring, facilitating that process moving along, and that totally changed the game. Because they are directly, then it's like compliant, internationally compliant, and people are not scared anymore because, hey, I'm not scared about you running off. The bank's gonna be like becoming a guarantor or whatever. So that's probably one thing that specifically for fintech that I think you and I are looking pretty much like this as well.
Are you telling me that the Invest Hong Kong and the HKMA are going to start supporting? I'd love to know that, by the way.
Well, I can ask them how it is, but they are moving along on this area. So still, Hong Kong still has the difference in terms of how the banks are being controlled or the banks are managing themselves.
Well, I'd say, because I have some strong feelings about fintech in Hong Kong.
Right.
I like to think we're doing it, but I would also say that in Hong Kong generally, in that financial world, and in this respect it's somewhat similar to China, is big is all that counts. If you're big, okay, you can, okay, then you're probably compliant, you're probably all those things.
Right.
But if you're, even if you're very good at a certain technology or something, and you are compliant and so on, if you're small, then difficult to get the light of day.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm curious to see what you see in the marketplace. Like when I hear tech in Hong Kong, and family offices, it's usually who can get a second round or who can get like a secondary on Uber or something like that. Is that tech? I mean, yeah, it kind of is, but it's kind of...
It's very loosely defined these days.
I think so.
Too loose, to a certain extent.
I would say that to the extent that I've seen families get involved with tech, the conversations I hear are mostly those kind of, I was like, oh, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever is like, it's what price is going to get taken out at or something like that. Those are typically the tech that I hear as opposed to grassroots nurturing of Hong Kong.
Well, I guess it boils back down to investor assurance or how safe they feel about the kind of risks that they're taking. Of course, as a new company or a younger company, there's a huge amount of risk of whether this operational model is working in Hong Kong or somewhere else in Asia or in the world. But there's also the fear that these guys or these young guys or CEOs may run off with your money or buy Ferraris or whatever, which I've seen it all case along. It boils down to the management side or how involved those investors are, whether they're family offices, individual investors or firm investors, how much involvement they're going to put into, or the strategic value they put back into the companies themselves. And going back to what you're saying, yeah, there are certain family offices or certain, not just family offices, but the pseudo family offices, so the big property developers, they have their own kind of thing moving along. And one of the cases that I've been talking to them and they say it's pretty much like some of the family offices they are trying to digress into. And they're saying, hey, I'm looking into new technology, but that technology or that company should be able to encompass all of my existing businesses. So it's like if I'm a property developer, hey, your solution or your fintech or your whatever kind of the technology, a shopping mall solution should be able to cover all of my like 500 shopping malls in China and Hong Kong before you actually talk to me. So it's pretty much like hey, I want startup technology, but you better be able to cover that kind of a scale in order for me to put in, because it's normal, it's logical for these people, because hey, if I'm introducing a new technology come in, it's better be able so that it's going to be fair and also be able to cover all of my businesses. And sometimes the solution or the company themselves may be good, but they don't have that scale yet. So that's one of the sort of like the challenges or the conflicts between like a family office looking into those areas, and also to the degrees I think that how much of these family offices investors are looking into, oh, you guys are new, it's just a very pinpoint area, a niche area where we can put in into some of the things, because in your case, you have to put into your existing businesses as well. So to you guys, it's like there's also a risk involved as well. But just in a matter of whether you're talking about 500 shopping malls or we're talking about just one or two companies integrating inside it. So that's what we're seeing in this case around here. And going back to fintech, of course, Hong Kong is small in terms of the financial kind of branding Hong Kong has. It's definitely top-notch in Asia. It's just a matter of because Hong Kong is very different from China in terms of the banking system. It's pretty much decentralized. So even though when we have Hong Kong MA, it's still very decentralized. And I've been telling to a lot of people that it's a little bit difficult if you're just focusing on Hong Kong, because if you can talk to Hong Kong MA or the SFC or whatever, but they're still saying, okay, let's get all the more than, well, in Hong Kong there's more than a few thousand banks registered in Hong Kong. Even with the top banks, getting them to have a meeting together, that's like, well, once in a blue moon. and so that's one of the challenges of Hong Kong moving along. I think the Hong Kong government is still finding it pretty difficult in this area, but I think because of the changes, what's happening, and the recent store value kind of licensing moving along, they're still pushing it as much as they could. Yeah. But of course, it doesn't happen overnight. But going back, the challenges in terms of, going back to your family around here, I'm more interested in terms of when you see something new, in terms of going back and talking to your father or talking to other members on the board, which should pretty much probably, like many of them are family members around here. What are the normal conflicts in terms of, and how do you overcome them? Say, for example, it's normally the case where, hey, I'm very conservative, let's just look into like buying property in UK. Yeah. That's it. And for things like fintech or new apps, what is an app, what is smartphone, they're probably finding it difficult. I'm sorry, let me give you an example. Recently, I worked with, I went to a conference meeting with the Hong Kong government, and they were pulling in all the retail titans. So the Watsons, the property developers, all these companies coming in because they're traditional retail. And they're finding it very difficult in terms of how do they push on to the next level, which you mentioned is what's the next big thing moving along. And one of the key things that we mentioned during that time is how we integrate the traditional retail or the traditional businesses into new business moving in. But they're still seeing some of the challenges moving along because of the fear, because of what's happening outside in the world. And when we talk about investment, everyone talks about ROI. When can I get my money back? 200% by tomorrow, or never, or I'm losing all this money coming along here. So how do you, as a family office, talking to your family members and say, okay, because it's not low risk. Yeah. There is risk. There's always risk about that, but it looks a little bit more unstructured as well, which increases that risk adversity outside. So how do you go back and talk to them?
And that's a good point, and that also drives why we've taken typically, I mean, I'd say most of the investments we've made, we take a 30 to 50% stake in the business, not small, and we inject management, because then I can go back to the family and say, we're not giving our money to other people to play with, that there will be a guiding hand there, maybe a veto power, maybe not, there will be oversight, and so that kind of gives them assurances that, because I'd say like the VC funds we've invested in, there were certainly some hits, but by and large, they averaged out to be something very pedestrian. And it was illiquid. It locked you up for 10 years and all that kind of stuff. So it just, they felt like you had no control over it. Right. And so the control side is one thing, and the other side is the learning. So if I could phrase it in terms that say that there's definitely a budget for learning. It's like, it's not like many families, they may save money here and there, but they'll definitely try to send their children to the best schools. Right. So this to me is like, well, okay, we're not spraying and praying, we're taking meaningful stakes and possibly having a guiding hand in the company, and 3, it's in a focused sector and we're learning something new about one other facet of that sector. In those terms, I think it's much more acceptable. I think there's always a budget with the families for the purpose of learning, especially if the second generation is saying, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to take some kind of role or whatever. We're not firing from afar, and it has, ultimately, it's not maybe not that big of an investment. It's part of the learning budget because this will improve our skill set and so on. I found that to be almost the only way that I can persuade them to look at this type of stuff. But generally, I try to get a block of an internal VC proposition of saying, this block of capital, you can have visibility to all the things that this capital is going to be used for. It will be within these types of format and terms, but then I don't want to come back every time there is an investment. I want to work with my team to work out if this is something that should be done, how it should be done, and so on, as opposed to every single one must be passing through some kind of board and so on. Right. That might not be a bad idea as well, but I think to overcome, it's easier to just get one block and one block of commitment, right, as opposed to every single deal. Right. Everybody gets to opine and pipe up on. Right. So I guess it's a question of amounts. Right. If you a reasonable amount, then it's okay.
It makes a lot of sense because it's more logical. It frames their mindsets as well, so that they don't go swing outside and thinking about, okay, this is not safe enough, but it's more controlled, much more controlled area where you can actually sandbox it. We say.
I mean, it's also frustrating, I'm sure, for the companies who are looking at families to possibly invest in them, right, and it's like 5 meetings, 7 meetings, 8 meetings. It's like, oh, we're going to go. Oh, the founder's out of town, or the board's not convening till this. And that there isn't that. If you were really trying to build some kind of business like a VC, I mean, I think realistically these days, if you're not one of those giants that everybody calls, the first call that anybody would make, then you have to pick one sector and be the domain expert, right, and then that's almost the only chance you'll get that first call. Right. And then if you do get that first call, you still have to move fast, right, prudently but fast. Right. If it's going to be a long, drawn-out process, well, then you just won't get that call, and you build a reputation as it's kind of a time waster or something like that. So
be more focused and more niche in an area.
I guess, and especially if the family has some kind of precedent in a certain area, yeah, it might be a stretch for, I don't know, for a shipping family to say, I'm only going to look at shipping technologies. But if there is some kind of pedigree or something from that industry, then that's certainly an edge.
Yeah, definitely, because that's what we talk to a lot of companies as well. When they were looking for investors, looking for not just for the money, but also strategic investors, right, coming in along not just for the money, but also for the background and also the connections and the business know-how in terms of how we can push this company operation to the next level. For example, like people in retail, people already very expert in the shipping industry or other industries, they can actually inject in all the experience coming in. And with you being on the management board, of course, that's something that some of them may be welcoming. Which goes to the next question is, by the way, if you got any comments or questions, do raise your hand up as well, because it's not just us talking, we're talking to you as well.
Reorient ourselves.
Yes, yeah. A lot of companies, the new companies that you want to invest in, when you're talking about taking a bigger stake, 30% to 50%, that's practically like taking over the company.
I mean, it's in some ways, and I say that because that's usually at the very, very early stage, where we're almost co-founding the company, but we're giving it enough capital that they probably don't need for a fairly long period of time. Right. They do not need capital. Now, I would also couch that in that most of those situations are where it needs both OPEX and CAPEX. So that number is also covering to some degree the CapEx requirement, which can be a separate arrangement. So we have a dedicated vehicle that covers the CapEx, say trading capital as an example, or forward deposits to telecom carriers to purchase minutes or data or time or all that kind of stuff. And then you have the main asset-light operating business, or the main operating business that houses all the technology, IP, and all that. So there is a, I mean, you're basically giving them all the money they're going to need for a foreseeable period of time, and you're doing it almost at a very early stage. So at that point, it's kind of, and you're probably injecting some sort of management as well.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it sounds high by tech standards, but that's also the thing that I don't understand is that I don't think I could go in and sort of, even as a, because I come from maybe more of the, or my experience has been more in the world of, let's say, hedge funds or lending strategies and so on, where nobody gets these kinds of valuations, but I guess on the basis of growth, but being a debt person is typically a pessimist. I don't really believe in growth, I just believe in assets and what's the value. So when we invested into some of these things in China, we were just looking at the value of the licenses, and we thought the licenses were worth this much. So we're like, okay, well, we're buying licenses. So even if the business goes to zero, well, we're going to take the licenses, and it's still okay.
You still have something.
So I think there is a value bias even within tech,
Right.
that families might be more comfortable investing into technology with a private equity VC angle,
Right.
on there being some degree of technology and collateral that can underpin
Proprietary
the
technology
value,
license.
as opposed to a purely valuation hype play or something like that. I don't know. I
Well-
certainly don't understand how.
Well, it does. It makes a lot of sense, because that's what I tell to a lot of companies as well when they're asking me about how you evaluate or how you do the valuation of a new young startup company when you practically have nothing or no revenue. And one of the key factors that we look into is how much IP do you have, the licenses. Are you a medical company? Do you have something? If shit happens, can I sell off something from your side? Do you have property? Do you have a Ferrari, or do you have something else can I sell off to? So it's like, even if the business doesn't work, at least if we can just sell off to cheap to other people, someone's going to pick up the bill and actually get some assets coming up from it.
I think like also one other thing that might give comfort to the family, I know specifically, I'm pointing generally in that direction. What they, I think the founder is brilliant, and he has not made many tech or entrepreneurial investments. But when he does, his only question is how much are you putting in? I might be willing to put in more money, but I want to know you're putting in everything.
Right.
And don't talk to me about sweat equity. I want cash from you in as well.
How desperate
Day
do you
one.
want?
Yeah. How badly
How
do you
bad?
really want to do this?
How committed?
How committed are you financially, not just sweat equity? I hear the sweat equity story
Yeah.
all the time.
It's all talk.
Yeah, I mean, it's, sweat equity, and, we'll make a bid. Everybody seems to be making a bid and all that stuff.
No one's actually giving money.
Yeah, I know, it's just, and then especially in fintech is that people are too optimistic about who's your client base. If it's going to be large institutions, well, they will drag you, even if you did have something they wanted, they will drag you to the point of death and then pick you up for cheap.
Right.
They're ruthless businesses. I mean, they're big, they've got scale, they intend to use that as much as possible. It's what any businessman would do if they had that kind of scale and they had all these 50 tech companies around them saying, oh, my tech's better. I was like, okay, yes, we fully support all your efforts, we'll give you every support short of money.
Yeah.
And then we'll see
Anything
who
but money.
survives, and then we'll pick up the pieces.
Yeah.
That's what a large player would do. So oftentimes we hear the fintech guys say, oh, hey, I had a great meeting with like blah, 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 blank.
Yeah.
And I had a great meeting. I was like, and you're going to have lots of great meetings, I guarantee you. And then that's going to be it.
Yeah, that's how it is. Well, it's interesting when you point out a few things, going back to what you mentioned, is how you guys go in and as pretty much like a co-founder or putting in much more skin into the game. because from a more outsider point of view, or from a company's new startup point of view, is they're thinking very like straightforward. They say, hey, this is an investor. They give you like $100 and pretty much that's it. But you mentioned one thing is that you put in $100, but you give in something a lot more later on, moving along. So the CapEx, OpEx, and everything else behind it, not just the connections, but there's going to be more money coming in from that case. It's not that lateral or unilateral kind of thing. It's more like a consistently moving along, because you're co-founders and you're not like outside investors coming in and say, I'm going to give you $100 and that's all you're going to get. And if you want to get more $100 or $200 later on, you have to do another round of founding.
Right.
So it's more like a do things, stop, and do another round, start over again. But for family offices, it's a little bit different, because you go in and invest, but hey, you're part of the whole team with the skin in the game. You're actually inside the team itself, and you can sort of like get more money or get a little bit more funding.
And the support
And the support
infrastructure,
infrastructure.
like if you're going to launch a business, you're here.
Yeah.
China's on the doorstep. How
Right.
do you sort that out? Do you have a VIE structure if that's needed? If it's
Yeah.
not needed, do you have domestic entities, because some of the licenses are only
Yeah,
available in
VIEs are
domestic
missing.
entities? So there's 20,000 headaches to get anything done in China, but it's right there. And if you're telling me you're going to start up something here and China's not somehow a part of that play, and it's a little. I mean, you need to find a way to make that story relevant. If nothing else, then for like an eventual exit without a China story when you're in Hong Kong.
Right.
I don't know. What would be the proposition?
Yeah, you still need that market moving along, whether it's China or something somewhere else outside.
Like I would
Sustain.
say that outside of, let's say outside of Hong Kong, China, where I guess China especially valuations are very rich. U.S. in our opinion valuations are very rich. One place we found interesting was Eastern Europe, including Israel, obviously, where actually valuations are very attractive, and you're getting very talented programmers able to build very complex systems. They may not be that great at the sort of the consumer gimmicky stuff, but in terms of hardcore industrial strength systems, then that's a very interesting source. Like all the Russian physicists all know how to program. That's just how they were trained. It was part and parcel with their education, and you don't necessarily find that combination, very rigorous math and very strong programming skills in many other places. So if it was up to us, and if I was saying I want to start a VC today, I'd probably park myself somewhere in Eastern Europe to look at stuff there where it's still very cheap, but if you could simultaneously launch it in US and China, you've got all the markets